Relax and listen to the voice. Hello again, everyone. Thanks for coming back. We now present you with more scary legends from the U.S.A. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share our content, and interact with us. We try our best to respond to everyone who comments. And with that, here we go. From Texas. During the American Civil War, there was a road in Texas between Groves and Port Neches. A woman named Sarah Jane lived on this road. Her husband was away, fighting in the war as a Confederate soldier. When enemy soldiers were passing through the area, Sarah Jane feared that they would kill her and her baby. She went down to the river and placed her small infant in a wicker basket. Then Sarah hid the baby under the bridge, an act in which she thought she was protecting the child. Sarah made her way back down the road to her home and waited for the Union soldiers to arrive. After the soldiers had passed by, she went back to the bridge to retrieve her baby. Unfortunately, the baby was nowhere to be found. The tide had risen and carried the baby away downstream. Sarah Jane searched through the night down the banks of the Neches River for hours and hours in hopes of finding her baby safe and sound. Neighbors could hear Sarah Jane's screams as she searched, and she kept running up to people, weeping pitifully and asking, "Have you seen my baby?" Grief-stricken and unable to find her child, Sarah Jane walked back to the bridge and hung herself from the wooden beams beneath it. When people found her body, they saw a message scratched into the wood under the bridge that read, "Where is my baby?" As the story goes, if you go out to Sarah Jane Road at night and stand by the water's edge, you can still hear Sarah Jane's baby crying off in the distance. Some people claim that they've spotted a noose hanging beneath the bridge. Others say that they've also seen Sarah Jane's ghost, searching along the side of the river for the infant child that she lost so many years ago. Locals say that you can stand in the middle of the bridge on a dark night and call for the ghost of Sarah Jane to appear. In order to do so, you have to repeat 7 times, "I've got your baby, Sarah Jane." From New Mexico. One hot, sweltering summer, many years ago, people who lived in New Mexico began picking up strange messages on their CB radios. The messages were from a little boy who said his name was Larry, and the little boy was asking for help. He said that his father had been taking him on a trip to hunt rabbits. They were in the middle of the desert, miles from nowhere, when the red and white pickup truck that they were driving in ran off of the road. According to the boy, the truck flipped over and they were trapped inside. The boy said that his father was laying on top of him and his father was not moving. The messages were reported to the local authorities and the police launched a search for the little boy in the foothills of New Mexico. Despite the fact that some people thought it was a hoax, the police took it very seriously. It was definitely possible that the child was somewhere in the desert. However, the boy, whose name was Larry, had no idea where he was at. He was struggling to answer questions and he became confused easily. Some people thought that perhaps he had a head injury. He said his legs and knees had been hurt in the crash. By the second day, Larry was not transmitting regularly. Other people joined in the conversation on their CB radios. Some of them were concerned citizens who honestly wanted to help. Others believed it was a hoax and acted as hecklers who wanted to make fun of Larry. Some of them tried to ask questions that might pinpoint where exactly in the desert the truck had crashed. They asked Larry what he remembered and what he had seen just before the truck flipped over. Others would just scream at him and tease him and call him a fake. By the third day, Larry's voice was growing weaker. He said that his father hadn't moved at all, and searchers were sure that the man must be dead. Hecklers continued to taunt him, shouting, "You're gonna die too, Larry. You know that? You're gonna die." At last, Larry's voice was growing very faint, and he said he knew he was going to die. Over the radio, some people laughed at him and shouted, "Die, die, die!" Shortly afterwards, Larry's transmissions faded away, and he was never heard from again. The police didn't have much to go on, and the case remained unsolved. A family who had a son named Larry were reported missing, but eventually they were found in a different city, alive and well. The police even came across an overturned truck in the desert that seemed to fit the description. However, there was no one inside. In the end, the police finally called off the search. Was it all a hoax? Or are the skeletal remains of a little boy named Larry still lying undiscovered somewhere in the New Mexico desert as of today? Perhaps we'll never know. One of the amateur CB radio operators was quoted as saying, "I personally have never had any doubt that this is the real thing. I heard the kid crying. I just can't believe that it isn't the real thing." From Cannon Beach, Oregon. I can still remember the first time I heard about the scary figure with the bloody bandages. It was back in 1960, and I knew the kid that had the first terrifying encounter with the Bandage Man of Cannon Beach. There's an old road that leads off of an old section of Highway 101 that had been bypassed when a new section was added. This stretch of road was a popular place for local kids to go out with their girlfriends and boyfriends. One night, two of the local kids, a boy and a girl, were driving up there on that stretch of road. The boy parked his old Chevy pickup by the side of the road, and he was making out with his girlfriend when they started to hear some strange noises. All of a sudden, they felt the vehicle lean back and rock from side to side, as if something was moving around in the back of the truck. They turned around to look out the rear window, and they found themselves staring into a bandaged face. There was a man crouched in the back of the truck, covered from head to toe in bandages that appeared to be stained with blood. The only thing showing through the bandages were his weird-looking eyes. For a second, they just stared at him, completely frozen in terror, and then the bandaged figure started beating on the rearview window and banging on the roof of the truck like a madman. The boy was absolutely scared out of his wits, and the girl started screaming hysterically. The boy started up the truck engine, got it into gear, and tore out of there as fast as he could. His girlfriend covered her eyes and kept screaming in terror. As they were driving away, they could still hear the terrifying sound of the bandaged man pounding on the back window of the truck. Then there was a tremendous crash and the sound of breaking glass. Frightened out of their wits, they just kept on driving, speeding down the highway and not daring to look back. Finally, they reached town and pulled into a service station. Once the truck had stopped and they had both managed to calm down, they looked behind them. The bandaged figure was nowhere to be seen. The boy got out and checked the back of the truck. The rear window was definitely smashed. The roof was dented all over, but the back of the truck was completely empty except for a few stray bandages. At this time, that kid and his family still live in Cannon Beach. I went to school with two of his brothers. Of course, he's all grown up now, and he married the girl that he was dating at the time. They both told me that since that night, they have never again ventured out to that isolated stretch of Highway 101 for fear of running into the Bandaged Man. Drivers have long reported seeing the strange and disturbing figure of a man, completely wrapped in bandages, haunting the roads outside of the small community of Cannon Beach. They say that the sight of him is horrific to behold. Apparently, his body is mangled and his limbs stick out at odd angles. The bloody bandages are wrapped almost entirely around his face and body and hang loose at the ends. Those who have slowed down or stopped when the figure approached their car have been savagely attacked. They say that he jumps onto vehicles that are passing by on the road. Sometimes he breaks the windows, and other times he crawls across the roof and hangs down, blocking the view from the front window. Each time, they say, the bloody figure clings tightly to the roof of the vehicle as it speeds down the highway, and he always vanishes just before they reach town. Those who have come close enough report that he smells absolutely horrible, as if his flesh is rotting away. The occurrences with the Bandaged Man always leave behind stray bits of his bloody, foul-smelling bandages. Legend has it that he is the ghost of a logger who was cut to pieces in a grotesque sawmill accident. They say that he was severely injured by the blades of the saw and died while wrapped in bandages. Locals believe that his ghost returned to exact revenge for his untimely death. Whatever the story, the Bandaged Man is said to be terrifying, violent, and destructive, and should be avoided at all costs. Here's a personal account from someone who claims to have seen the Bandaged Man. 2 years ago, I was with a group of friends, and we were traveling home from the beach. It was late at night, and we saw a man running down the highway with strips of white cloth hanging from his body. His body jerked back and forth in a really odd fashion as he ran. We had no idea what we were looking at, and it really freaked us out. We didn't know if it was a ghost or some crazy escaped mental patient. The funny thing is that none of us knew the legend of the Bandaged Man at the time. Only a few months later, my mother was talking about the ghost legends of Oregon and happened to mention the Bandaged Man. I was in shock hearing this when she began telling the story, because I knew that she was describing the hideous apparition that I had seen running down the highway with his bloody bandages fluttering in the breeze. From Meriden, Connecticut. The Black Dog of Meriden, Connecticut is a small, ghostly dog who leaves no footprints and makes no sound, even when it appears to be barking or howling. According to legend, if you see the black dog once, it means that you will experience joy. If you see the black dog twice, it means that you will experience sorrow. But if you see it a third time, it means death. According to Meriden's local legend, the black dog can be seen barking, but it makes no sound. Where it trods the ground, it raises no dust, and in snow, it makes no footprints. Ghost-like, the dog appears as if out of nowhere and takes its leave just as mysteriously as it roams over a large area around the hills. In the early 1900s, a geologist by the name of Pynchon was surveying a mountain in Meriden called West Peak. He saw the black dog was following him, keeping its distance but still staying in view. When Pynchon turned to go home, the dog disappeared into the trees. The second time that he saw the dog was a few years later, while hiking in the same spot with friends. One of the friends he was climbing with said that he had seen the same dog twice before. As they approached the peak, the dog was already ahead of them. Pynchon heard a terrible scream and he turned in horror to see that his friend had lost his footing and had fallen hundreds of feet to his death on the rocks below. When Pynchon got back to Meriden, locals told him about the legend of the black dog, but he simply refused to believe it. The locals told him never to go back to the mountain because if he saw the dog again, it would mean his death. A few years had gone by, and Pynchon had decided to climb the same mountain. He left his lodgings bright and early one morning, and he never returned. His dead body was found sometime later at the bottom of a ravine. People say that the night that he died, he must have seen the black dog a third time and fallen to his death. Over the years, several lives have been lost on the Meriden Mountain, including an experienced alpine climber in 1972. Although all the fatalities are listed as accidental, the old-timers and locals know that they were brought about by the Black Dog of Meriden. So if you're thinking about hiking the West Peak in Meriden, Connecticut, be careful. From Tulsa, Oklahoma. The legend of the Bulldog Man begins in the 1920s at an old amusement park that was located on Old North Road between Sand Springs and Tulsa. One day, a poor family were driving by and they stopped to visit the park. The father and the mother had a lot of children and they couldn't afford the entrance fee. Instead, they were forced to watch all the fun going on inside from the seats of their car in the parking lot. They say that when the parents got all the kids back in the car and drove off, they didn't realize that they had accidentally left their youngest son behind. Some say that the parents abandoned the little boy on purpose because they felt that they had already had too many mouths to feed. The young boy was only 4 or 5 years old, and he lived off of popcorn, corn dogs, and other snacks that were discarded by people who visited at the park. At night, when everyone had gone home, the legend states that the boy would sleep inside of the amusement park. A few years later, the amusement park was closed down, and the boy found himself homeless. He was wandering aimlessly around the woods and sleeping rough. One day, he wandered into a brick factory, and the workers there gave him some food and allowed him to sleep in the warmth near the brick kiln. Every day, the factory workers brought him sandwiches in their lunches, and, in a way, they unofficially adopted him. One night, as the boy slept peacefully near the brick kiln, a pile of bricks shifted and they fell onto his head. His face was crushed and his nose was pushed in. The factory workers didn't want to pay for the boy to go to the hospital, so he never received any medical attention. His face healed on its own, and the poor boy was permanently disfigured. His appearance had the squashed nose of a pug and hanging jowls like a bulldog. The factory workers began calling him Bulldog Boy. He never went to school. He never received any education other than what he heard the factory workers talking about, so his only hope of getting a job when he grew up was to work in the brick factory. Unfortunately, when the Bulldog Man was old enough to work, the brick factory was closed down. Feeling dejected and angry at society for making fun of his mutilated face and for the hand that he had been dealt, the Bulldog Man went off into the woods to live alone. He became a hermit, avoiding the cold stares and the cruel laughter of others, living off of whatever he could find in trash cans. He spent his time sleeping in a makeshift shack in the forest and guarding the old abandoned brick factory where he grew up. They say that he carried a gun and would take a shot at anyone who got close enough to catch a glimpse of his ruined face. There was a nearby lover's lane where local teenagers would go to make out. The Bulldog Man would often sneak around the lover's lane looking for food. He sometimes ate the discarded hamburgers and french fries that the teenagers threw out of their car windows. They say that if you didn't throw some food out for the Bulldog Man, he would creep up to your car, scare you, and potentially kill you. What became of the Bulldog Man? No one knows. People say that he is still spotted now and then, lurking in the woods around Old North Road. From San Antonio, Texas. Anyone who has lived in San Antonio has heard the legend of the Donkey Lady. As the story goes, back in the 50s, a young woman had been in a fire that her husband started in their house. The woman lost 2 children in that fire, and she was left horribly disfigured. It was said that when she ran screaming from the house, she fell to the ground, and her arms and legs were so badly burned that they snapped off, leaving her with blackened stumps for limbs. Those blackened stumps looked like hooves. Her face was so scorched by the flames that it melted, and her skin drooped and got baggy, making her appear to look like a horse or a donkey. Disfigured and totally insane, she stayed mostly in the rural areas, living under bridges and terrorizing anyone who approached her home. She lurked in the dark woods near her home, and she is said to have pounced upon unsuspecting victims. All of the children in the area heard the stories of the Donkey Lady and spent dark summer nights imagining exactly what she might have looked like. One family, a father and 2 boys, were passing through San Antonio on a camping trip, and they made the mistake of stopping near Donkey Lady Bridge to set up their tents and do some fishing. The group pulled up to a weed-infested area off of a dirt road and began to make camp. The 2 boys were unloading the pickup truck while the father found a suitable spot for the tent. While unloading the truck, one of the boys heard a rustling in the weeds nearby. He told his brother, who in turn called out to their father. The 3 of them together watched the tall weeds beneath the trees bend under the weight of what was apparently a large animal. At this time, they heard an odd snorting sound and heard hooves clomping on gravel. The 3 of them got very scared and quickly threw the tent, the sleeping bags, and all of their fishing gear back into the back of their truck. While packing up, the father spotted something out of the corner of his eye as the weeds shook nearby. The thing hiding in the bushes seemed to be heading for the road, the only exit, as if it was trying to cut them off. The father urgently shouted for the boys to get into the truck as fast as they could. All 3 of them were in the truck in a flash, and the father started it up. He put the truck into gear and was just pulling out onto the road when something large and black burst out of the weeds and landed right in front of them. A second later, a horrible apparition bounded up onto their hood and began shrieking at them and pounding its hooves on the windshield in an attempt to try and break through the glass. It was the ugliest thing any of them had ever seen. They all swore that the wretched creature looked like a cross between a donkey and a human being. The father floored the accelerator, and the truck peeled out onto the road. The monstrous creature was thrown off the hood of the truck and into the ditch by the roadside. They said that it almost looked like a wild animal with an incredible look of rage and hatred in its eyes. Without stopping to look back, they burned rubber and drove at high speeds to the nearest police station. Once inside, the wide-eyed family told their story to the police. As it always goes in these tales, The police refused to believe them, of course, so the father demanded that they come outside and take a look at his truck. When the police went outside, they could see that the truck had a windshield that was shattered and cracked in many places, and the hood was scuffed, scraped, and dented with what appeared to be deep hoof marks. The policeman was speechless, and when he finally regained his composure, the only thing that he could say was, "Well, it looks like you had a run-in with the donkey lady." From Gratis Township, Preble County, Ohio. According to legend, in the 1930s, there was a terrible accident on Brubaker Bridge. 5 cars crashed into each other on the bridge, and all of the people in each of the vehicles were killed on impact. Because the cars had crashed in such a remote area, no one saw it happen, and it remained undiscovered for one whole day. Eventually, after nightfall, a neighboring farmer was driving his tractor down the road and he discovered the crash. He immediately alerted the police. When the ambulance finally came, the workers found a total of 12 bodies in the wreck. The bodies were all put into ambulances and brought back to a local funeral home, where they were all identified and given proper burials. After such a tragic accident, the town was eager to try to put the death crash behind them. However, shortly after the accident, the farmer who originally discovered the bodies claimed that every time he crossed Brubaker Bridge, his tractor would suddenly stop for no reason. Then, he would hear 13 loud knocks, followed by a strange gurgling and hissing sound. Other locals told the same story. They said that they would be driving down the road, and their cars would suddenly stall as they were crossing Brubaker Bridge. This was always followed by someone or something knocking 13 times on the car, and then, right before the car started up again, that gurgling and hissing noise was heard. The farmer began to wonder if the ambulance workers had really recovered all the victims of the death crash. He took it upon himself and he searched the area around the bridge and eventually wandered into the woods by the side of the road. What he found there chilled him to his very soul. Sitting propped up against a tree, covered in snow, was the dead body of a man. He was frozen stiff. His arms looked as if they had been eaten away by the black bears, leaving only bloody stumps. His mouth was hanging open, and his tongue was missing. The farmer had found the 13th victim of the crash. The man had been thrown out of the car in the accident and wound up lying injured by the side of the road. It has been presumed that he had been dragged into the woods by black bears who devoured his arms and his tongue. The ambulance sirens likely scared off the black bears, and the man was still alive when the ambulance workers were taking the dead bodies out of the cars. The gurgling and hissing sounds must have been the man trying to call for help, but his arms and his tongue were gone, so no one could hear him. Today, locals still believe that the ghost of the 13th victim haunts Brubaker Bridge, stopping any car that dares to cross his path. The ghost beats on the side of the car with the bloody stumps that were once his arms, and then tries to call for help, but all that comes out are hisses and gurgles because he had lost his tongue. From Spencerville, Ohio. A plaque that has been erected on Bloody Bridge tells the story that gave the bridge its creepy name. During the canal years of the 1850s, a rivalry grew between Bill Jones and Jack Billings for the love of one Miss Minnie Warren. There became hatred by Bill because Minnie chose Jack. On a fall night in 1854, when returning from a party, Minnie and Jack were surprised on the bridge by Bill, armed with an axe. With one swing, Bill is said to have severed Jack's head. Upon seeing this, Minnie screamed and fell into a watery grave. Bill disappeared, and when a skeleton was found years later in a nearby well, people asked, was it suicide or was it justice? Almost immediately after the murder, whispers of ghostly images seen on and around the bridge began to surface. Some people saw the ghostly apparition of a headless man walking across the bridge at night. Others say that they looked into the murky waters while crossing Bloody Bridge and saw the ghostly face of Minnie Warren staring back at them. As more and more people saw the ghostly apparitions, they began referring to the bridge as Bloody Bridge. From that point forward, people began to come from miles around and walk away with pieces of the bridge as souvenirs. From Hillsborough, New Jersey. Pig Lady Road in New Jersey is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a woman who has the body of a woman and the face of a pig. As the story goes, sometime in the early 1900s, there was a man who lived with his wife on a secluded pig farm in Hillsborough, New Jersey. The wife got pregnant and gave birth to a horribly disfigured baby girl. Supposedly, she was so ugly and so grotesque that she resembled a pig. The father couldn't bear to look at her, so he chopped off one of their pig's heads and put it over her own head as if it were a mask to hide her face and to humiliate her. While the girl was growing up, she was teased mercilessly about her appearance, and the local kids nicknamed her the Pig Lady. She vowed that someday she would have her revenge. When her mother got sick and eventually died, the Pig Lady buried her in a plot in the backyard. After that, she grabbed an axe from the barn and went into the house to take care of her father. The Pig Lady chopped off her father's head, and in a move that recounts heroic irony, she replaced his head with the head of a severed pig. As she grew older, the Pig Lady remained secluded and lived like a hermit. She didn't want to have any contact with the other citizens of the town. One day, two young boys caught sight of her, and when they saw her face, they began teasing her and calling her Pig Lady. Later that night, those boys returned to the property and they placed a dismembered pig's head on her doorstep. Those two young boys were never seen again. Years later, after the Pig Lady allegedly died and her property was repossessed by the town, they dug up her garden, and in a shallow grave, they found the bones of two young boys. According to the legend, the ghost of the Pig Lady still haunts the area, and a number of people claim that she has attacked them or their cars with an axe. They say that if you drive down Pig Lady Road at night and you flash your headlights 3 times and yell out her name, the Pig Lady will appear. She will then come after you with an axe and chase you and do her best to chase you out of the area. After you have left and you've exited your vehicle and can inspect it, they say that you will find scratch marks on your car. Also, they say that if you leave someone there by themselves and drive away, when you come back a few minutes later, you will find them with scratches all over their body. One evening, a group of teenagers drove out to Pig Lady Road and decided to test out the legend. We all admitted to being scared, except for my friend Jen. She was calling us stupid for being so scared. When she got out of the car, she started calling out the Pig Lady's name and taunting her. We all got spooked and we sped off down the road. When we eventually stopped the car, we were all laughing at how scared we had been. And that's when we noticed that there was no Jen. In our terror, we had accidentally left her behind. When we went back to pick her up, there was absolutely no sign of her. We all kind of thought that she must have been playing a joke on us, so we all got out of the car. Our friend Shannon heard the sound of crying coming from a nearby bush. That was where my friend John found Jen lying, and he carried her out of the undergrowth. We got back into the car and we drove off in silence. After leaving the deserted area, Jen was still crying, so I turned around to comfort her. That's when I noticed all the scratches on her arms, her face, and her legs. From San Antonio, Texas. As the legend goes, in the early 1920s, a wealthy family of little people, father, mother, and 2 children, moved to San Antonio. The father had made a lot of money appearing as a midget in Hollywood movies. He had always resented having to live in houses that were built for normal-sized people. So with his money, he designed and constructed a tiny mansion for his family. It was entirely built to scale, down to the last tiny detail. Tiny stairs, tiny toilets, doorknobs close to the ground, all of it. He also built several tiny houses next to the mansion that were the servants' quarters. But for some reason, he hired normal-sized people as housekeepers and servants. This was possibly because of the discrimination that they had faced all of their lives, and it was said that the family of little people had grown to hate normal-sized people. They took their anger out on their servants, treating them very poorly. These servants were forced to live and work in tiny, cramped, and very confined spaces that were really intended only for little people. The family enjoyed watching their tall servants struggling to cope with their smaller surroundings. Allegedly, this mistreatment went on for a long time, until finally one of the servants snapped. In a fit of rage, he set fire to the mansion and unleashed an attack on the family with an axe as they tried to flee. As the members of the family lay dying, the crazed servant gathered up their bodies and he stuffed them into a bedroom closet. It is said that he then took his own life. Firefighters managed to quench the flames, and the horrible deed was then discovered. Maybe because of its bizarre history, the property remained vacant for many, many years. It came to be known by the locals as Midget Mansion, and all of the neighbors said that it was haunted. The neighbors claimed that they heard screams and saw figures moving about inside the house, even though it was supposed to be vacant. People who have visited the mansion claim to hear strange sounds of scratching coming from inside of the walls. Those sounds seem to be loudest in one of the bedroom closets. For years, this mansion has attracted hundreds of high school students on Halloween night who dare each other to knock on the front door as they try to provoke the unseen inhabitants into action. This story is claimed to be from various areas, including Red Rocks in Denver, Colorado, Moon Point Cemetery in Illinois, Arbor Hill in Albany, New York, or Bowie Park in Stamford, Texas. Back in the 1880s, there was a beautiful young woman who was engaged to be married to a local man. The night before their wedding, she is said to have caught him cheating on her with another woman. The bride-to-be flew into a furious rage and grabbed a hatchet. She brutally attacked her cheating groom, swinging the hatchet until all of her rage was spent, and she had, in effect, hacked him to pieces. Ever since then, they say that the Hatchet Lady haunts lovers' lanes in these areas. If a young couple happen to be out after midnight, the Hatchet Lady then becomes infuriated and is likely to appear. They say that now she's a haggard old woman with dark, black eyes, and she carries a hatchet in her hand that is always covered in blood. One night, a teenage boy decided to play a prank on his girlfriend. It was only supposed to be a joke. He asked one of his friends to dress as the Hatchet Lady with a wig, a black cloak, and a hatchet covered in red paint. The teenager was then going to take his girlfriend and another young couple and drive out to where the Hatchet Lady was supposed to appear. The plan was that when they got there, the boy's friend was supposed to jump out of the bushes in the creepy costume and scare everyone. The two young couples showed up and parked the car in the deserted lover's lane. It was after midnight, and they waited for something to happen. The teenage boy who had tried to orchestrate this whole fiasco shouted out the Hatchet Lady's name 9 times. Just then, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees. As it came closer, they saw that it was an old woman with black eyes, and she was holding a hatchet. The boy began laughing because his girlfriend and the others were so scared it seemed that they were scared out of their wits. His window happened to be down, and his arm was leaning on it as he sat laughing. All of a sudden, the woman swung her hatchet and whoosh, hacked off his arm. Everyone in the car was splattered with the boy's blood. Somehow, they managed to get away, and the doctors at the local hospital managed to save the boy's life, but they were not able to reattach his arm. They say that this boy's girlfriend went completely insane and spent quite some large amount of time in a mental hospital. The other couple in the back seat were also extremely traumatized. As it turned out, the friend who was supposed to play the prank on them was later found dead in the bushes. According to documentation from the local authorities, they say that the boy dressed as the Hatchet Lady had been dead for hours before this attack had even happened. From Malheur County, Oregon. Many curious people visit Salem, Massachusetts for a spooky, witchy experience. But if you're far away from Massachusetts and you're anywhere near the Pacific Northwest, you don't have to go that far. You can simply head to Oregon and visit the extinct volcano that is affectionately nicknamed the Witch's Volcano. Some people say that the volcano used to be a place for dark magic and satanic rituals. Of course, this piques the curiosity of many. As of current, you can't explore Malheur Butte as freely as you could at one time in the past. What was once open to the public is now in many areas private property. That might be a good thing, since there have been reports for decades about how haunted and creepy Malheur Butte allegedly is. Malheur Butte in Malheur County, Oregon, is a volcanic area located off of Highway 20, close to the banks of the Malheur River. The Malheur Butte stands 5,000 feet above the ground and is a distinctive historical landmark. During the 1840s, this natural site of wonder was known as Kennedy Butte and was home to several native tribes. The butte was often used as a navigational aid and served as a vantage point, monitoring incoming wagon trains, and the surrounding hot springs were often used for washing garments and bathing. The butte has been inactive for millions of years, yet scientific study has revealed continuous geothermal activity. This is the same energy which powers the hot springs. Thermal energy has been harnessed and repurposed by Oregon scientists. We can't help but wonder what else is powering up under these earthy rocks. For many, many years, there have been rumors of human sacrifice and satanic ritual at this location. Many people have described seeing witches' covens built into the cave sides, and they suspect that the very darkest practices have taken place there. Perhaps, according to legends, this would explain the continual discovery of human bones that are being unearthed there. In fact, this site is a known meeting place for clandestine and highly secret societies. We were fascinated to discover that sections of the butte are rumored to house active portals to the demonic realms. Basically, these portals are said to be an open road to hell itself. Horrifically, many hikers and outdoor enthusiasts have reported suffering distress when sighting dark, demonic, imp-like, shadowy creatures which they describe as resembling mutated demonic hounds. Campers at the site have told of inhuman growls and disembodied voices heard around their tents during the night. Some claim that their tents have been violently and physically dragged across the grounds with their occupants inside of them. Alarmingly, spontaneous fires, which literally ignite before people's eyes, have caused many to leave early, along with fires that appear to have started from nothing, accompanied by a sensation of being chased or preyed upon, and feeling spiritually attacked by dark forces. According to those people who have experienced this, these demons do not ever play nicely. Now, we consider ourselves to be logical thinkers, but we do love to think about and take in the concepts of spooky legends and myths. These are some ideas about the reports of dark magic and the witch rituals up on Malheur Butte. Some people have claimed to hear creepy voices and possibly the cackling of witches. One could rationally assume that it could probably just be some friends hanging out and shooting the breeze. Maybe somebody told a funny joke and cracked everybody up, and maybe a couple of the people in the group happen to have a distinct, loud, abrasive, or annoying laugh. As to the human bones found around the site and in caves, well, Oregon is the Wild West. Perhaps these people were eaten by bears or wolves or many of the other animals that are out there in the wilderness. And depending on where these bones are being found, if this was a site of many native tribes in the past, the discovery of human bones should be and could be easily carbon dated to see if they belonged to some of the people from long ago. What about those spontaneous fires? Malheur County is somewhat desert terrain. In fact, a lot of Oregon is considered the high desert. Fires all throughout Oregon are a thing, especially when humans are around. As far as tents being dragged with the people inside of them, that one seems hard to explain. Perhaps it's other people in their friend group pulling a bad prank, or maybe it's some people who are actually living in the area, off-grid, desperately wanting their privacy, trying to scare the campers into getting out of their area. We may never know the truth behind these stories, but we do suggest that you're very cautious if you go out camping near Malheur Butte. From Presque Isle, Pennsylvania. The Storm Hag lurks below the surface of the lake near Presque Isle. Her lithe form forever swimming through the weeds and the mire. Pale and green of skin, her yellow eyes shine luminously in the dark, and her thin, long arms wrap themselves around the unwary, while foul green pointed teeth sink into the soft flesh, and sharp nails at the end of long bony fingers stroke you into the deepest sleep that there has ever been. She is called by many names, but to the sailors of Lake Erie, she is known primarily as the Storm Hag. The creature is allegedly a sea witch, an evil Jenny Greenteeth, who summoned the storms and pulled shipwrecked sailors down into her evil embrace to live with her forever at the bottom of the lake. Sometimes she waits until the calm right after the storm to attack. When the sailors have relaxed and let down their guard, they're lulled into thinking that the danger is past with the storm. Then, the Storm Hag bursts forth from the dark waters of the lake, spewing forth lightning and wind like venom. As the legend is told, at this point, the ship may vanish, never to be seen again. There's only one warning before the Storm Hag strikes. It's said that if you listen closely, you can hear her singing against the harsh wind and the thrashing waves. She sings, "Come into the water, love, dance beneath the waves, where dwell the bones of sailor lads, inside my saffron cave." It is said that if you can, you must flee immediately, for if you have heard this song, the Storm Hag is right beside you. If you cannot flee immediately, then it's advised that you pray to your God for mercy, for the Storm Hag will grant you none. The whirlpool created by the Storm Hag will suck down your ship, and her long, green arms will lovingly stroke you into the depths of the lake, where she will then feast on your body among the weeds. From Coxsackie, New York. About a mile back from the river stood the cabin of Nick Woolsey, who, in the 1800s, was known to the river settlements as a hunter and trapper of correct aim, shrewdness, endurance, and taciturn habit. For many years he lived in his cabin alone, except for the company of his dog. But while visiting a small settlement in the wilderness, he was struck with the engaging manner of one of the girls. He repeated the visits to the settlement, and thereafter he found cause to go to the settlement frequently. At length, he tried and he won the maid's consent to be his wife. The simple marriage ceremony was performed, but the wedding was interrupted in an almost tragic manner. For a surly fellow who had loved the girl, yet who had never found the courage to declare himself, was wrought with such jealous fury that at the discovery of Woolsey's good fortune, he sprang up and tried to attack him with a knife. The man would have dispatched him on the spot, had not Woolsey's faithful hound leapt at the man's throat and drug him down to the ground. Woolsey then disarmed the fellow, and he kicked and beat him all the way out to the edge of the woods, while the whole wedding party shouted with laughter at this humiliating punishment and let it go on as if they approved of it. After that time, about a year or more had passed by. Woolsey did marry this woman, and he and his wife were quite happy in their free and simple life, and they were happy as well in their little child. Woolsey was seldom absent from his cabin for any considerable length of time, and he usually returned to it before the night set in. One evening he noticed that the grass and the twigs were bent near his house, and it appeared to be bent by someone passing by, and with the keen eye of a woodsman and hunter, he could tell that these were not bent by his wife. Some hunter must have seen the house when he passed by here, and must have stopped to look in, thought Woolsey, for he noticed that the trail of broken grass led to his window and then diverged back into the forest again. A few days later, as Woolsey was returning home, he came upon footprints that appeared to have been freshly made, and then suddenly a shadow crossed over his face. Upon nearing his door, he stumbled over the body of his dog, who was lying rigid on the ground. As he flung the door to his cabin open, he shouted, "Minnie, what's wrong with the dog? How did this happen?" His wife answered in a low, hushed voice, "Oh, shush, you'll wake up the child." Right there stood Woolsey, where he entered the cabin, and he looked as if he had turned to stone. His wife Minnie sat on the golden hearth. Her face and hands were cut and blackened. Her dress was torn, her eyes were glassy, and she had a meaningless smile upon her lips. In her arms she held the body of their infant child, its dress soaked with blood, and the head of their baby lay on the floor beside her. She sang softly over the cold, dead body of the baby as if she was trying to lull it into sleep. And when Woolsey became unfrozen and found his words, she only whispered to him, "Hush, you'll wake the baby." The night went on as if it had an immense weight attached to it, and as day dawned and the crooning from Minnie became lower and lower, as she sat all throughout the day, rocking her child to and fro upon the floor, and as Woolsey sat there in agony with his head in his hands, trying in vain to give his wife comfort, to help her, and to get some sort of explanation of the mystery that had confronted him. As the second night came and went, it appeared to be evident that it would be his last night with his wife. She began to become weaker and weaker, and her strength failed until she finally allowed herself to be placed on their couch made of skins, while the body of their child was gently lifted from her arms. Only then, and only for a few brief minutes, was her reason restored, and she found the words to tell her husband about how the man whose murderous attack he had thwarted at their wedding had come into the cabin, shot the dog as he rushed out to defend their home, beat the woman back from the door, tore the baby from its bed, slashed its head off with a knife, and then flung the little body into her lap as he uttered the parting words, "This is my revenge, and now I am satisfied." Before the sun was in the east again, Woolsey's wife had died in her husband's arms. Woolsey sat for hours in the ruins of his happiness, his breathing alone proving that he was still alive, and when at last he arose and went out of the house, there were neither tears nor outcry as he saddled his horse, took up the carefully wrapped body of his wife, and rode off into the west. At nightfall he came to the settlement where he had won his bride, and relating to the assembled settlers exactly what had happened, he demanded that the murderer be given up to him. Upon seeing the serious nature on the man's face as well as the body of one of their former community members, the man's request was readily granted. Whereupon the settlers advanced on the cowering man, and with the quick fling and jerk of a rawhide rope, they tied his arms to his side. At that point, they then tied the body of Woolsey's deceased wife to the killer, and they flung them both, one living and one dead, onto the back of a horse, securing them there with so many turns of rope that nothing could displace them. With a shout, the settlers sent the animal plunging, foaming and snorting into the wilderness. When the horse had finally vanished and the hoofbeats were no longer heard, Nick Woolsey took his rifle on his arm and he left the settlement forever. The legend of this story states that the horse never stopped in its mad gallop, but that on still nights it can still be heard sweeping through the woods along the river like a whirlwind, and that as the sound goes by, a soft, weak, smothered voice breaks out in cursing, in appeal, and then into harsh and dreadful laughter. And so it comes to an end. Scary Legends from the U.S.A. Volume 2. We do hope that you've enjoyed these stories. We hope that you'll keep coming back and spending your time with us. We do so much enjoy having you here. Take care of yourselves and never stop telling these stories. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.